My apologies. I need 3 screens like Marina's, but then I might have more work. So what do you guys see? Do you guys see just my PowerPoint? Cool. All right, let's get started. So the objectives that you saw for today are for the next 2 sessions that I have. So we'll go through the first half because in 45 minutes, I don't really have a lot of time. So if I start to speak too quickly, you are more than welcome to tell me to slow it down just a little bit. Today, we're going to go over trauma and what they carry, the clients that come into our clinics, how it impacts their daily lives, and then we're going to start with some strength-based communication. If we get that far, we shall see. And Allison has already introduced me. If you all can kind of introduce yourselves and your roles in the clinic, something you're curious to learn about trauma-informed care, not only will I try to address it today, but I will also try to address it in the next session that I come back next month. So feel free to type things in the chat because I like communication and I like to know I'm not talking to just a blank screen. That's no fun. So the first thing that I do is I talk about what our clients carry, what our patients carry when they come into our clinics. And one of the things that we all know that we're doing is trauma-informed care. That is a huge grant that we've been working on. And so what is trauma? I have slides because I feel like I always have to have slides. I will not read to you off the slides because that feels like I'm reading kindergartners. That's not my thing. But what we do know is trauma is outside the range of everyday human experience, and it creates this higher and longer than normal stress response in children. As we're working with children, their families, their caregivers, and other people in the community, we're dealing with trauma, not just from the people that are coming into the clinic to get served, but their families as well, and the people that they might be around. So they don't just come and get a diagnosis, they come and they experience so many different things. And we might be in additional trauma, even if we're not trying to be, because we are having to work with them and coordinate care for them with whatever medical things that they're coming here with, especially if they're being diagnosed with HIV and AIDS. That is a traumatic experience in itself because now they have to process that, and not only process that in your office, they're also having to process that in the community and how they're going to interact with the community at large. Thank you all for starting to answer. All right, so this trauma feeling can often result in people feeling trapped and helpless when they're personally experiencing or witnessing something in their world that they don't have control over, when they are witnessing somebody who has a threat of death or injury or a threat to themselves or another person. Trauma also gives this experience of horror and terror. In this context, trauma is broadly defined as experiences that produces intense emotional pain, fear, or distress, and it often results in long-term physiological and psychological consequences. These experiences of trauma, they change the structure of a brain. One of the things that I'm really, I've always been pretty curious about is the way the brain develops, right? So we hear that brains don't fully develop until 24 years of age for females, 32 for males, but when a brain has encountered trauma, depending on what stage that they have encountered trauma, it can slow down the development of their brain. And that is something that you all might be seeing in the clinics when you're there. So this can lead to long-term physical and behavioral health problems. And even though trauma has multiple different definitions, we do know that there are some consistencies, that the event that threatens their life or the physical safety of them or somebody else close to them will trigger this sense of terror and hopelessness and horror, and that they tend to go into autopilot. When they go into autopilot, there are different bodily responses, and we'll get into that in just a bit. So what kind of traumas do people have? We have acute trauma, which is caused by a single event, like a serious accident or the sudden loss of a loved one. We have chronic trauma, which is caused by multiple events over a period of time. So the field that I'm in, the study that I do, is typically with people experiencing chronic trauma. It is this trauma that it feels cyclical for them, and it's almost like they get wrapped up in this. So one of the things that I've enjoyed looking at is Bessel van der Kolk's The Body Keeps the Score. His book talks about developmental trauma. Now, they didn't put that in the DSM because they said it was a niche area, and I'm like, oh, but multiple therapists work with that. So definitely we're dealing with people, especially if they're getting these diagnoses in a young brain state. This developmental trauma is something really big happening to them. So this is the notion that early childhood adverse experiences can lead to substantial developmental disruptions. And with that, there's no known evidence of these developmental disruptions that were preceded in time. So if they don't know when they happened, we can't targeted, but for you all, you have the luxury of seeing people experience these developmental traumas when they come into you and they receive these diagnoses, because not only are they having the mental trauma of something happening, their body is experiencing trauma because of all the different things that are happening to take place in order for them to fight the battle that they're fighting with HIV and AIDS. So when we are looking at that, we try to look at the adverse childhood experiences scale. And doing that, we recognize that these adverse childhood experiences have a tremendous impact on the future behaviors. So when clients are showing up into our clinics and into our rooms, we are seeing them after at least one traumatic experience in their life, and we know that they don't exist in a bubble, that there may be more. And in that more, there are things that could be happening in the home: verbal abuse and threats, physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, neglect, separation or divorce, intimate partner violence, substance use or abuse, history of mental illness or suicide, and a history of imprisonment. So with that, we're not just looking at the outside of things, we're looking at, are you feeling insulted? Are you feeling put down? Are you feeling humiliated in the space that you're in? Because not only can this happen in a household, this can also happen, as we know, in school. And a lot of times the bullying in school can be even more traumatic than bullying in a household, because it's something that cannot be controlled, because there's a lot of retaliation when it's reported. So we have to pay attention to all these things when we're working with these youth, because we know that their responses are not always responses towards us. It's not personal. Even though they're in our room and they're sitting in front of us, the things that they are responding to are what's happened to them in the past. So if they have been physically abused, pushed, grabbed, slapped, thrown, any of those things, or touched in inappropriate ways, they are going to have different bodily responses than what we may be expecting. So we have to learn how to respond to them in a way that is careful and caring. And one of the things that I'm always really concerned about is when somebody shows up with a behavior that is less than ideal, that we struggle with the desire to want to work with them because they aren't showing up in a way that fits our agenda. If I can't help you because you're showing up like this, then this person doesn't get help. So we have to learn to work past that barrier of their behavior. So in working past that barrier, we like to look at some trauma-based responses. So we have fight, flight, or freeze response, which is something that everyone typically knows about. We're going to talk about the window of tolerance, because this might be really helpful to pay attention to in the office or in the clinic or in the room when they come in, where somebody might be within their window of tolerance. They may not have this language. So for us to have this language, it helps us to teach them this language so they can communicate with us more effectively. And also the grief that they may be experiencing, because grief has its own response. And a lot of times we forget that people are not just having this one experience right now. They are having a grief experience because of whatever losses might be coming along with it. So let's talk about fight, flight, freeze, or what we're also looking at is fawn. So one of those it's like freeze is kind of like deer in the headlights. Fawn is more like playing possum, because it is just too much. And we'll talk about that even more. So when a person is in their window of tolerance, this is their comfort zone. This is where they feel the best and they're able to soothe themselves and regulate their emotional state. What we might be seeing in our offices and our clinics are people who are either hyper aroused, so they have gone so far outside of their window of tolerance, they enter their fight or flight response, or they might become hypo aroused, where they're so outside their window of tolerance, they freeze or they fawn. In these spaces, they are no longer able to regulate the emotions and the behaviors that come along with it. So what you might see are impulsive behavior in person. And that's one of the things that we have to think about, is that we are in person with these people. So they are not having the luxury of regulating before they get some of the news that we're giving them. We're also working with families who might be dysregulated because they don't know how to manage their responses. They don't know how to show up for the person that they're caring for, or they may not like what they're hearing. So with all of that, we see rigidness, obsessive compulsive behavior thoughts. We see a lot of negative self-talk. There might be harmful behaviors. I have been informed that people tend to have suicidal thoughts and self-harm behaviors that can come up in sessions or in appointments. And so this is one of the fight or flight responses, because it is almost an escape route to think about taking their lives, because it's like, okay, well, I don't want this. And since I don't want this, this is my next step. There's also the freeze response, where if they feel stuck, if they feel dissociated, or they feel shut down, there's this sense of disconnect or depersonalization that happens because they're unable to process quickly. You can also see self-harm behaviors in this because they might just want to feel something. So in that space, we have to figure out ways in the moment to bring them back into their regulated state. So you'll see in the orange bubble how to stay in the window of tolerance. There's a lot of mindfulness skills. What we don't have the luxury of in a quick clinic setting is teaching these outright. What we can do is teach ourselves some really quick and effective grounding exercises. So some of those are focusing on the 5 senses. Where are you at right now? What do you see? Or thinking about, this is my breath, this is my body, and having them really ground themselves and repeat this to themselves. Because the one thing that they have to hold on to in these moments where they feel out of control is the one thing that they will always have control over, which is their breath. Yes, and Allison, if you want to say anything else on that, I would love to address that as well. So when we are doing these exercises with them to get back into their window of tolerance, we also have to take into account what doesn't work and what we know doesn't work for them. So if we're noticing that we're trying to breathe with them and that's not working, we have to try something else. And working with youth, I've learned that I can't just tell a kid to breathe. I can't just say, I need you to breathe. I have to do something different. I have to get creative and do something that makes them feel engaged with what I'm doing. So in working with 3-year-olds, I might have them take a really deep breath and hold this bubble inside their mouth and then blow really hard on my hand. And that to them is one of the coolest things that they can do, is actually like blow on my hand, because there is a goal. So even if it's not like technically mindfulness, because they have a goal, it is a way to get them to regain their breath and regain control in that moment. When it comes to older adults who have a freeze response, I more recently had a adult call me because they couldn't feel their legs. So we did progressive muscle relaxation exercises over the phone, where we worked from our head down to our feet. So that way we could gain that feeling back, but not jump right into it. So we have to listen to what their needs are, and it not be, this is what I need from you right now in order to help you. It's, this is what you need from me in order to be effective and help you in this way. So this is part of the skills that I teach very often to my clients who experience a lot of trauma, because when they're able to have this language of window of tolerance, they can also communicate that they're starting to get outside of their window of tolerance. The joy of working with clients regularly is that as you teach them this language, they're going to be able to come back in and say, this is where I was at today, like, or this is where I'm at today. I feel like I'm on the edge, and we're able to bring them back down. When we work with them and we teach them these skills, what we're doing is we're increasing the space. I always say that many times when people experience crisis, if anybody's ever watched Aladdin, I always think about the original Aladdin with Robin Williams. I always think about Genie in the Bottle, where he's like, yeah, like big, tremendous emotions and power inside this itty bitty teeny living space. And then eventually, when he's able to figure out how to manage all of the information that's coming into him and all of this power that can be had, he's able to live and exist in this greater space. And that's what we're looking to do, is give them this greater space to exist in. So that way the clinic is not a place of fear. The clinic is not a place of distress and trauma. It is a place where they know that they feel safe with the people that are working with them. So we have these skills in our toolbox. We're able to bring it to them and put it inside their toolbox and share those tools with them, because it's a lot more effective to work with a client who can figure out how to regulate in a session with you versus trying to just get them to calm down. So like calm is the first word in the yellow box for cool, calm, cool, collected, and connected. But one of the things that we never want to do is tell somebody to calm down, because that will immediately throw them out of their window of tolerance. They will be like, calm what? I always have Samuel L. Jackson in my head with that. He's like, I am calm in one of the movies he's in. And I'm like, yeah, that's pretty much how it goes every time somebody tells somebody to calm down. So we have to think about how somebody could become more reactive when we say certain things. And looking at this window of tolerance, you also get to look to see where you are at. Because if a person is escalated in your space, it is very easy for us to be triggered into fight or flight response. When we start to feel triggered into fight or flight response, we have to check in with ourselves and say, okay, what's going on right now? I always have, if you ever see me in person, some people have already, I always have a water bottle with me with ice cold water. It is my like walking skill where it's anytime I start to feel a little flustered, I can stop and take a drink of water. And what I'm doing in that moment is creating space to get back into my window of tolerance. So if you're able to get a drink of water, you're able to get them a drink of water, what you're doing, even if you're going to get them a drink of water, you're creating space for them to get back regulated. And you're also doing a self-care thing for them and for you. So we get to create all of these different safe spaces to help people build their window of tolerance. Instead of trying to control it, we're just assisting them and building it for themselves. If you guys have any questions at this time, you can let me know. If not, I'm actually just gonna sip my water now just because my throat is dry. I apologize. When I feel like I have a lot to say in a short amount of time, I don't drink enough water, so my apologies. All right, so the next thing is looking at vulnerability factors. These are conditions or events that make a person very sensitive to what is happening around them. They might be more likely to make emotional interpretations. They may be, even in the population that we're working with, may be more biologically reactive to specific events, and they may be more susceptible to having these really high levels of emotion. And that we look at the recent events. If they have had a recent traumatic experience, if they are just getting a diagnosis, if they have a family member who has just passed, there's a lot of things that can happen that can create a more vulnerable state for them when they come into the facility. There's also events from their past. Even if it's in the past, a lot of times people just want people to get over it. And when it comes to grief, it's not something we just get over. There is no timeline for grief. So in this grieving space, we have to give them that permission to say, oh, it makes sense. This triggered this grief response from you, because grief is a cycle as well. There are different stages of grief, and we might move through them quickly and then go right on back. So if they're in any of those stages of grief based on a loss that they've had, then we have to be present for that and say, okay, I get it. This is why they're reacting this way. This isn't for us to be the therapist. It's for us to be therapeutic and connected with our clients and our patients. That is super important, because that's how we get them to give us the information that we need so we can help them the best way possible. So you'll notice the last box is something that one of my teenagers, when I wrote it on the board, they called it Haltitos. And I was like, I like it. It's like Doritos, just a little less tasty. So I've used it ever since. Everyone has probably heard of the HALT, which is hungry, angry, lonely, tired. What I have done is found other things that happen in my clients' lives that can create even bigger emotional vulnerabilities that we may not always look at. So if a person's hungry or hormonal or even hot, like I know Midwest summers get really hot. It's a pretty dangerous city in the summer, unfortunately. So we try to like address that by having cooling centers for people, right? So when we notice there are different things that could be increasing their vulnerability, especially if somebody has come from multiple bus rides and train rides to get to your location, or they traveled a long way, they could be hot, they could be worked up, they could be super just anxious, which is on the next one. And in that anxious space, they're unable to just process the information quickly. And if something doesn't go right from the time they walk in the door to the time they get to you, maybe a person at the front desk isn't the most sunshiny, or they don't greet them well, or they make them feel like a bother, that can create even more anxiety and even lead to anger, because those tend to go hand in hand. When we are feeling like we're running late, I don't know how many of you, and you guys can either say me in this chat or raise your hand on the slides, not the slides, but there's a reactions button. But how many of you, when you're running late, you are a lot more agitated? If you think you're going to be late for an appointment, you get more worked up, you get more frustrated, you get just this anxious feeling, this buildup. See, some of you are like, yes, absolutely. So if our clients are running late and this is the only appointment they could get, it's super difficult for them to re-regulate. So we have to be as affirming as possible and not shaming, because what happens when we shame them for running late, it increases. And you'll see at the very bottom that shame space. Like, we might like to be early, and it's not always possible. Like, I would love to always be early. And I, for some reason, got a dog this year. Don't know why, but he tends to make me late for things because I always have to walk him. So I get really frustrated because I'm like, okay, I gotta go. You gotta hurry up and pee. But that's not how life works. So if somebody doesn't have control over everything, it can feel really anxiety provoking. We have being lonely. I can imagine with the diagnoses that a lot of these people are receiving, it can be a really lonely space because they're receiving the diagnosis. Maybe nobody else in their family, maybe nobody in their friend group, maybe nobody else they know has this diagnosis, and it can be a lonely space. So they don't know how to connect with others because they're scared of what that connection could look like, how they could be hurt, or how they could be rejected based off that connection, based off that information. So being able to build community is going to be really important for the people that we're working with, and having different groups. I know that there was a group that was starting around the time that a parenting group for people with and without HIV and AIDS. So that way they can learn how to build a connection with their kids more effectively, but they were able to build connections with each other in the group as well, because it is a lonely space. If you're tired, you're probably a little crabby. If you're thirsty, your brain isn't running on all cylinders, which is why I always have my water, because when we're dehydrated or hungry, our brain just doesn't make all the connections it needs. So you guys are the doctors. You guys probably know a lot more about that than me. And then environmental threats or stressors. I've heard Baltimore is not the safest place. So I was told, like, when I went, to stay within my couple blocks radius. So if a person doesn't feel safe, even in their home environment, or if there's abuse or neglect or violence in their community, those environmental threats and stressors can add even more pressure, because not only did I have to fight through all of that to get here today, I have to leave here and go back to that. So maybe this clinic is the only safe place that I can exist. And then when I leave, maybe I'm scared to leave. I mean, depending on what type of hospitalization that a person has, I know people who will try to get hospitalized on psych units even longer than what their need is, because they know when I return home, I am not safe. And if there's no safety that we can do, no resources that we can give to create that safety, they're going to try to stay where it's safe for them. If a person is using drugs or they're not taking their meds as prescribed, with the diagnoses that you all are giving, if these meds are not taken as prescribed, they're more susceptible to other things, which can make them more agitated. I mean, that's just the word for today, I guess. But what it does is it puts them at risk. And when you put yourself at even more risk, there's a lot more emotional vulnerability that comes with it. If they're not eating well, I'm sure that they have to. And I'm sure that sometimes medications keep them from being able to eat well. And it's not diet as in like the fad stuff. It's diet as in what are the nutrients that I'm putting inside my body? How am I feeding myself? I once had a client with Crohn's, and she lives off Flaming Hots and Mountain Dew. And I was like, hey, you know how many times you're getting hospitalized? I wonder if the drinks and the foods you're putting inside your body are creating these flare-ups. And when she changed her diet, she stopped being hospitalized. It was like magic, right? If they're feeling overwhelmed, they are. There's not really an if. Many times when they're coming in, they feel overwhelmed because of the magnitude of what they're experiencing. So we have to pay attention to all of these things. If they're actively sick, stressed, feeling shame, they're lacking structure. We got to meet with a young lady who was looking for a job, and by not having a job in that moment, that lack of structure created a lot of just issues for her behaviorally, because she's like, if I can't have this, like, this is really hard for me. And then she spirals and she's unable to come and get her meds because she's unable to pay for them because she doesn't have a job, because she doesn't have structure. There's that whole spiral that just happens. Or even spiritual conflicts, because having a diagnosis can create this spiritual disconnect. Like, how could you let this happen to me? Depending on what they believe in. So when we look at all of these things, we get to see our big picture for the people that we're working with, instead of just what we see an agitated human standing in front of us. With that, we get to figure out how to work with them more effectively. And in working with them more effectively, we are building our communication skills in order to communicate in a positive way and communicate with them in strength-based perspectives, right? So we don't want to communicate in a way that is shaming. We don't want to talk to them like they don't understand what we're saying to them, but we also don't want to use words like jargon that they're not going to get. So it's not you don't understand, it's that I have this clinical knowledge and I have this language that we use here in my setting, and I have to make it to where you understand it. And then setting appropriate goals. We're not asking people to become rocket scientists. We're asking people to take their medications on time, come in to their appointments on time, make sure that they get their resources, make sure they have food. And then I'm seeing that there's food deserts that exist. So I don't know. I do know that there's a resource page with different resources. And Allison, you can help me out and let me know, are there food banks that are on that maybe the clinic could try to partner with? And I don't know, I have ideas for stuff. It doesn't mean it's always going to come to fruition. And then we get to provide positive role models. So if we respond to them in a way that is positive, if we respond to them in a way that is affirming, it allows them to see what we're looking for in those interactions. So a lot of times when people start cursing and yelling and just having a fit because of what's happening with them, it's okay for you to just listen. And I think that's the hard part, is just listening, because what they're doing is expressing what's going on internally, that battle for them. And for us to listen, that is providing the most positive feedback that they could ever receive, to say, you exist and you get to have this emotion. And this emotion is really painful for you. And I see that. The validation in that it's transformational. And I've seen it happen where, I mean, I've been cursed out by teens. Teens have been my population for years because residential facilities tend to favor teens, and teens who live in poverty, teens who live where their household structure isn't stable, and their way of responding, their way of reacting is what they've learned in their community, in their household. So who am I to say what you're doing is wrong, when I could sit and listen and say, oh, wow, that must have been a lot going on inside for you to feel the need to express it like that. Let's talk. And once they express it and they let it out, it's almost like, I use this and it's probably gross, but you guys work in the hospital, so you feel like you can handle this. But it's basically like when a person drinks too much alcohol and they got to let it out and they got to throw it up. When a person has too many emotions, they got to let it out and they got to emotionally vomit. And that emotional vomit is not personal. It is not about you. It is not about what you're saying to them. It is about everything else that we just talked about. It's about recent events. It's about their history. It's about their emotional vulnerabilities. It's about this new diagnosis. You were just the person delivering message, and we say, don't shoot the messenger. And we also have to be that messenger that's affirming and saying, it's okay. I get it. You're in pain. I'm here to support you. With that, we're demonstrating this acceptance of their emotional experience and where they're at in their journey, because the grief of losing perfect health, the grief of losing whatever friends might be lost based off of this new diagnosis, the grief of losing security and just your longevity. Like, you might think, and working with many different people, they're like, they feel like they're almost immortal, like they're going to live forever and they can do all these crazy things and nothing bad's ever going to happen to them. Well, boom, I just got a diagnosis and something bad happened to me, and now my mortality is here. So my grief of losing that, like, I always think of kids having this like Nintendo Super Mario Brother mentality. They feel like, I can jump off of this and I'll just come back to life like Super Mario does. No, you can't jump off of that. Like, I need us to be safe, right? So they've lost that innocence. They've lost that curiosity. They've lost that I'm going to live forever mentality. So when they lose these things, we have to accept that they're going through their own grief cycle. And even though they're still alive and they're still coming to see us and they're still in our clinic, there's a lot of losses that they're experiencing in this one moment. So we get to be there and we get to accept them in a way that they may not feel accepted in other spaces. And then we also get to allow them to determine where they're at and how they want to receive care. Because some people may be resistant at first. They may be in denial. And in that denial space, we can give all the resources, but we can't make them do it. There's this, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. This isn't leading the horse to water. This is bringing the water to the horse. Because sometimes, if you've ever worked with horses, the horse isn't going. The horse is not going to the water. If they're like, I'm not it, they're not doing it. So you can bring the water, you can bring the resources to them. And if they are not willing to do it right now, you can be persistent and you can try to be persuasive. What we cannot do is we cannot force them to be willing. That is a change behavior that they have to be aware that they need to have. There are tools that they're going to have to build for themselves. And so with that, we get to encourage and support them during this entire process. And in that encouragement and support, it is still validating them. It is still letting them know that these are their choices. And in making choices and telling somebody like, this is your choice, we no longer take their power away. We are giving them power. And I feel like I spoke really, really quickly. because I was afraid, but I am done with this week's portion. So if there's any questions, please ask, because I was like, oh, I can skip into something else, but I want to wait for next week, or the next month for that.
Yeah, no, I mean,
I'm sorry. Oh, I feel like I was just going a mile a minute, so I hope that it all.
I think we started a little glitchy in the beginning, so I think you're a little paranoid getting through, but I thought it was great. I think I see a comment in the chat. This is from Gail Glesser. And Gail, you can put your camera on if you want, but this is very helpful and informative, both at my work as a project officer and personally. My niece experienced trauma, and I've been her source of support. At HAB, we'll be conducting a community of practice for trauma-informed services for WICCI recipients probably next year. Great and informative. And I thought so. I think the slide that you put up, which had the hyper-aroused, the hypo-aroused, as you were presenting that slide, I was thinking about patients that I've seen even just this week and where they fall in. And I think that the question that I have, because I heard you say be persistent and what have you, but for some of our patients that they move along, but some it feels like they get stuck in one versus the other. And I think as a provider, I think I struggle with how to facilitate that movement from one to the other. And I see Gail's, I think, hand up after this.
Mm-hmm. So I'll answer that. So one of the things that I do, especially if somebody is in hyper or hypoarousal, is I get cold water or ice. Because what happens is if you can get a bowl of cold water, I'm not sure the resources for that, but if somebody can stick their face in a bowl of cold water, they can bring their heart rate down. If they are in hypoarousal, you can get ice and have them hold it in their hands, and it just kind of gives them that feeling, because what's happening is they are dissociating in hypoarousal from the trauma right now, because I've been through trauma. I know what it feels like. It's very scary, and I don't want to feel this feeling. And in not wanting to feel that feeling, they're rejecting their reality, and rejecting the reality, they're detaching from it. When we bring them back to awareness, it's like, okay, but we're still here, and we're affirming, and we're trying to get them to go back. So that grounding exercises, so like the woman that I was talking about who couldn't feel her legs, if you're in hypoarousal, we do a lot of grounding. We are here, like, what do you see? Name 5 things you see, name 4 things you hear, name 3 things you can touch, 2 things you can smell, 1 thing you can taste. If you guys keep like warheads or cinnamon Altoids or just mint, the strong mint ones in offices or in clinic spaces, they can pop one in their mouth, either hyper or hypoaroused, and it can help re-regulate them. And I say have different variety because everybody doesn't like everything. So being able to pop that in their mouth, it is a strong sensation that can be triggered and can be grounded too in that moment. Okay.
Hi, hand is up. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, guys. Well, first of all, this has been wonderful from 2 perspectives. Personally, I have a niece who is traumatized. My brother dies. She's abandoned. And she had been going through therapy. And of course, I didn't understand all the things she was going through. She lived with me for 2 years. And you put everything in crystal place, and she's doing awesome now. So I just want to say thank you for kind of reassuring me that, because I didn't think everything was going right for her, but I realize now listening to you, it was. The second piece is I work at the Division of HIV Community-Based AIDS at HAB, DCHAP. I actually served as and a long time ago in Baltimore City Health Department, I did the Ryan White program. So I'm very familiar with the work done by Hopkins, both Part C, Ryan White, and Part D. In fact, I do know your PIs and worked with them for many, many years. We are working at HAB on a community of practice around trauma with youth. And this is the kind of information that we really want to impart to the service system. How do you, on a one-on-one basis, incorporate strategies and techniques to be effective with the population, to get them to move to positive points? And as I said, I'm still feeling the effects of, you hit me personally. It's my niece. Mm-hmm. And thank you so much for letting me know she was in the right therapy. But this was awesome. That's the bottom line. It was awesome. I do like to keep connected because the planning for this community of practice will occur next year. We're starting with preconception counseling, and I do believe that your program is involved with that. You're one of the selected recipients. And we want to, again, incorporate these hands-on strategies and make sure that dissemination of these kinds of practices reach the workforce, because these are things that, again, personally experiencing this makes a difference in people's lives. So thank you so much. I don't want to cry on this.
It's okay, Gail. You can give me that emotion. I'll take it because that's really special. I put my email in the chat. I remember being told when I first got into this field that like you can't save everybody. And I said, well, then I can train. So if I can't save everybody, I can train more people. And in training more people, it is saving all the people that we can reach. And I think that it's super important. And I'm glad that she was in the right therapy.
So much.
So Donna had a comment. Donna, did you want to make your comment, or she's still on? Donna?
She said she did not have a question, but a comment. This was amazing.
Okay.
So,
I wasn't sure that was the whole comment.
That was the whole comment.
Oh, there she is.
I definitely. Hey, Donna.
Hi, guys. I just want to say thank you. This was amazing. It has helped me put some things in my personal life into perspective. And I work with a group of CHWs that I'm sure that they can also benefit from this. But Adrian, when I tell you this was amazing, it was truly amazing, very informative. I was able to gain a lot from it. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Thank you, Donna. Oh, you guys are going to make me all emotional this morning.
So I think one of the things that we've talked about, and I alluded to, but I guess I can elaborate here. One of the things that we wanted to do when I think many of the agencies in the city got money for trauma-informed care, and we wanted to look at it and to have a full evaluation of how we were doing. So what Adrian has been doing was really studying us, right? So came in, did surveys, did interviews, looked at, and Adrian lived in St. Louis because we were concerned that having someone who's based in Baltimore would not even realize what our environment was like, that our environment can be traumatized, and the alerts we get on our phones, oh, don't go out to this building or that building because there's a jacking or this or the murder. So wanted someone to come out from the outside and say, all of this is crazy, and all of you and your clients and all of it, they're all traumatized just by existing, right? So just by existing in this space, and then in depth look at what we were doing, how we were doing it, because there's our clients, and oftentimes the trauma-informed care, focuses on what is happening with them, but we also bring our old trauma by the comments that we're hearing from people and the response that we're having. We also have that, and I think what we struggle with, I think as providers sometimes, is there are things that invoke with us, and someone shows up a certain way, we show up to that way. And if we don't address it, then we're both dancing, and it may not be a beautiful dance. So what I loved about what you presented, and what I'm looking forward to the additional trainings you are going to be giving us next time and then further, is how we recognize the dance and how we're showing up and how they're showing up and how we can hopefully get to a different place for both parties involved. So thank you for that. Other questions, comments, feedback, things that people want to hear more about or less? Sounds like it resonated with folks. Let's see. Yeah. No, I think it felt very practical, Adrian, to be honest. Sometimes I think you said it, emotional vomit. I see some of my AC members on the call, and it is not infrequent that someone comes in and they're having a response, and you're right, they're not showing up how we want them to show up, and our response can reject and have them basically feel like they're not welcome to show up at all. And so, right, that emotional vomit is coming from somewhere, and our response, and whether we bring a bucket to catch that vomit or how we respond, I think matters. Awesome.
Yeah. And the biggest thing is when we're responding to them, we're not responding to them to get them not to have the emotion. And that is one of the biggest things that I teach my clients is it's not emotion termination, it's emotion regulation. So we're going to have emotion, we're going to have it safely. and we're going to express it in a way that feels good. And then we're going to learn how to embrace that emotion and know that it's not going to devastate. Or, this is the big one, emotions do not kill us.
Yeah.
It's our behaviors after the emotions that are the danger, not our actual emotions. So
Yeah. I think
I won't get started preaching because I will get on
No,
a
no, I hear
soapbox
you.
for that.
one of the questions I know that's going to come up, and maybe you'll get to it next time, so maybe it could be a teaser. I think where I see the challenge sometimes is when people are in those different buckets and you can't move them, and then that whatever that emotional vomit escalates to more than that, where they're disruptive or where you can reach that line of safety, or that's where I think we struggle a bit. And so I wonder if you can comment a little bit about that.
Yes. So the verbal de-escalation is the next piece, and talking about power and powerlessness. And that one needed its full hour because, well, it's full 45 minutes, and I'm going to get to it next time. And I may find that I have to expand on it even more when I do the in-person training. But the power and powerlessness that can happen in a space, especially because there's that white coat syndrome that happens. And if I feel like I have no power, then I'm going to escalate to exert and assert my power. And we might tend to try to meet them where they're at. And there's that thing about meeting people where they're at. We don't want to do when they're escalated. So we have to learn how to verbally de-escalate, but also knowing the right things to say. So we'll talk about how to say the things, what not to say. Like, you don't want to make them feel judged. We don't want to put them on the defense, because if I say something that's offensive, you will go on the defense and it can become an unsafe, harmful environment. And the biggest thing is letting them know this is a safe space, because we want them to come back. We want them to continue treatment. We don't want them to feel rejected by us, because we are the ones that are supposed to care for them. And one of the things that has stuck with me my whole career is love the unlovable. So even when a person is dysregulated, way outside their window of tolerance, being able to like take that sip of water, keep it calm. I've always been told this is my security blanket. Anytime a riotous act would happen in the residential settings and the foster care settings, I just sip my water and set it down, and my brain would snap into action with verbal de-escalation. It's like, if I have never had to be in a fight in my life, today's not that day. And it's not going to be that day. And how have I kept myself safe? I've learned how to talk to people. So being affirming, being validating, we'll talk about the different levels of validation that might be needed in these spaces. We'll talk about nonviolent communication coming up. That won't all be next time, because that'll have to continue into the in-person stuff, because even if active listening feels like, oh, I listen, it is not actually active listening if you're just standing there. If you stop to check your watch in the middle of having a conversation, you have now completely told them that your time is being wasted. So it's thinking about our physical presence in these settings and how we can be setting them off with little mannerisms that we don't even know. So there will be a lot more expansion on this. So I would just say, watch your body, watch your face. I used to keep a mirror on a door in one of the residential settings and say, you need to check your face. Everybody had to go to the nurse's office to figure out meds at the beginning of every day. So they had to check their face when they came out. Because I'm like, you in this face can completely set, if our energy is off, they're picking up on it, because they are walking nerve endings at times, and they can feel different energies. And when they feel our energy off, they will start to feel that in their body. When they feel that in their body, they will start to express it. And even trying to maybe start with mindfulness in sessions, like, let's take a couple deep breaths together. We have a really tough conversation about to happen. I've had sessions where we lead every meeting with a minute of breathing, just getting ourselves grounded, getting ourselves regulated before we start this hard conversation. It's starting where they're at and figuring out how to bring them to where it'll be effective for them to hear you and to receive the information and keep everybody safe. And that's also getting the frontline staff, like the people that are greeting them from the door in, this information to say, when they come through this door, we cannot be the person that sets them off. Not one person, not the security guard, not the front desk person. There can't be that energy that says, I'm getting paid to be here, I don't want to be here. Like, we have to let them know that we're doing this out of love. It's a passion, not performance.
Yeah. You said the exact same thing, David Gaviria. I hope I'm saying your name right. It said the exact same thing in the chat about it's the healthcare providers and really the entire team. And I take it's security, but it's all the way to the environmental services. It's everybody that interfaces with our patients. And I think when it's also recognized that we too are having a response, and how do we deal with our response? Because it could be triggering for us as well, right? So how do you do that?
Yeah, and we'll
so-
definitely talk about how to self-care. That's like how when we do the in-person, that's how I'll be wrapping up all of this intense training. Self-care. How do
Yeah.
we take care of us to show up for them? So,
Adrian, this was fantastic. Honestly, the comments in the chat are great. And our goal is to have this be a trauma training on steroids. So this is part 1 of 2, but more to come, and really excited. Not just about the information that you delivered, but the way you delivered it. It felt very reachable, attainable, and welcoming, and even with uncomfortable things. So really appreciate you taking the time, and looking forward to much more. So see you next month for part 2, and you've dropped a lot of teasers. Please, everybody, fill in your surveys, and you will be getting, it's recorded, and we'll share that. We'll cut out the technical part at the beginning, but we will share the slides and the presentation. And again, let us know if you have any comments or feedback. And Adrian, again, thanks for a fantastic presentation, and safe travels. We know you're headed out of town.
thank you, and I hope to see you tomorrow.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
All
You make it
right.
to Canada on time.
I hope to see you. Oh my goodness, yes, headed for a flight now.
All right.
Oh, let
Take
me
care,
read this
everybody.
before I leave, though.
Bye. Bye-bye.